Hey folks, welcome to Project Gamma. At Project Gamma, we have smart conversations with smart people across entrepreneurship, technology, and cybersecurity. My name is Warner Moore. I'm a technologist and security leader who has helped build multiple business-to-business software as a service companies, who's passionate about modern cybersecurity practices. I'm also the founder of Gamma Force. At Gamma Force, we help tech and health tech companies with cybersecurity strategy by serving as their fractional security organization. Today, I'm excited to have a local C-Bus tech celebrity here with us. Pete Gordon has a deep career as a technologist and is a community leader, having been a founding organizer of Google Development Group, GDG, Columbus, and Ohio DevFest. After an early and brief stint in the corporate space, Pete got sick of corporate and got a taste of the startup life and never looked back. Pete has established himself as a startup CTO, having served in numerous C-Bus tech startups. In 2016, ahead of the AI curve, Pete started leaning into statistics. Most recently, in 2023, he co-founded CyberContext, serving as CTO, where they're focused on using GenAI to solve compliance problems in enterprise companies. Thanks for being with us, Pete.
Thanks, Warren. Excited about it. I
So,
don't know that I ever heard myself referred to as a celebrity ever. So that's awesome.
yeah, we don't like consciously acknowledge his celebrity here in Columbus, really. It's not the Midwest way, Midwest nice, right? But I will say there are some folks who have a more defined impact, and you're among them.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
So thinking about early stage startup, you're a couple years in, and you're iterating on product market fit with some early design partners. Talk about some of the work you're doing right now.
Yeah, well, we built CyberContext really around meeting the need of large enterprise, primarily in the financial services space, in the area of compliance, in the area of like regulatory risk and policy procedures. And yeah, we've this year kind of broken into customer acquisition. We call them design partners, and we have a few customers now, and we're rocking and rolling with them. So my daily is really about making them successful and kind of narrowing in on that ideal product market fit, and growing that design kind of partner space over the next 6 months in terms of our customers too. So yeah, so I spend a lot of time in our software, a lot of time in our customers' data, and making Gen I kind of work for them in terms of automation.
I know with a lot of early stage founders or technologists who want to be founders, I have a lot of conversations about reframing the problem, right? Somebody falls in love with the problem and wants to build a product,
Mhm.
scratch their itch, but it's not about their itch. And well, mostly I encourage people to step back away from what they think the problem is. Don't build product, but think about what the market wants and learn what the market wants. I solve a market problem. And in a lot of ways, one of my most cited startup books, Lean Startup, talks all about that. And what I think is interesting is that's exactly what you're doing right now. So you're building product, you're building the company, but you're doing so working with those early design partners. So thinking about folks who might have not gone through that or might be trying to go through that. What are some lessons in the way you're able to engage with your early customers in building product?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Like I think like startups, particularly like in the software space, are constantly like a push and pull relationship between do I have product that demonstrates what I do, and do I have an understanding and the listening of the customer's space and able to reframe their problem right? Such that I'm able to meet their needs. And like balancing between those two is an enormous challenge. It's like basically putting together a plane while it's like heading down the runway and increasing speed, right? And trying to put it together at the same time. I think it's like my lessons learned in this are that it's really that you can't neglect either one. People react to not only based on the experiences they've had and their understanding, right, but what you put in front of them and what you can demonstrate to them, right? So combining that, like in terms of the product, right, and uh, and we do have we have our software product, that we've invested in and put lots of dollars and time and sweat and tears into, and then in the same time we're able to approach these customers as design partners in order to listen to them and then adapt and adjust. Because really, what you need is you need to work around that ideal, and the word I like to use is that ideal repeatability, right? That the market is looking for, right? And I think most people that I talk to like say that you basically can't, and I'm going to go back and forth on this a little bit, but I would just say that you can't tell the market like what to think. But on the other hand, sometimes you have to come to them with the ideas and the approach so that they can then digest it, right? So that they can then respond to it. And that's when you get like the moments, like kind of the iPhone moments, et cetera, right? Like redefining. Maybe even at a different, much smaller scale, or maybe in a more boring space, like compliance and documentation management, and regulation and requirements. But the same applies there, right? In terms of bringing kind of the product, the thing that is able to show kind of our vision, our point of view, right, on what is needed, and the listening and the feedback loop and the iterations with your customers to make sure that you're hitting them where it's valuable to them.
I always take a bit of exception to hyperbolic anecdotes, right? That are commonly accepted in business and startup circles. And the you reminded me of some of them, right? Like Steve Jobs. I
Yeah.
often hear people use Steve Jobs anecdotes about how if you listen to the market, he wouldn't have built the iPhone, right? It's like if you listen to the market, Ford would have built a faster horse, not a car. So
Yeah, yeah.
there's some merit there, but also we're trying to build a startup and a business, and that means get revenue. So if we don't solve a problem the market has, they're not going to pay us, and we don't have a business. So what are we doing? Not building a business, if anything. So I think we like take those anecdotes and overweight positions that are not binary.
Yep.
A business is a complex system, right? So
Yeah.
it's one of the more difficult things that one can do. It's probably the most difficult thing I've ever done. I've built a business, and I've done some pretty difficult things in my life. So,
I'm
like,
totally with you on that. Totally with you
getting
on that.
away from the cliches and like getting a bit into the meat, it's like, well, what we're really talking about is solving a problem the customer will pay for. So, how do
Oh,
you have those conversations? Like, how are you getting to the business value when you're working with your design partners?
yeah, I hope it was clear there that I was talking about kind of both sides of the coin, right? It's like on one side, you've got hey, I come with a point of view, right? I come with an idea I put in front of them because people more often than not need a starting point, right? To envision and to latch on to, right? Kind of what is and what is capable, what is possible. On the other side is now like feedback and iteration with them and understanding. And this is where you get your hands like really dirty, right? This
No,
is where
I love it. And I wasn't suggesting counterpoint by any means. I just heard it, and I knew somebody would hear your point and think one of those things, right? And if it
yeah,
wasn't
no,
that,
no, yeah,
it's
no.
like,
I'm and I tend to
e-
be I tend to be a grays kind of guy. Even though I write code, and there is no room for grays in code. The point is that when you're describing it, when you're designing it, when you're starting from these perspectives, and especially like a complex system like business, like you just said, like it really is like, hey, between these two extremes, like there's a truth and a big area of truth there. And the getting your hands dirty is really getting into the customer's mind, the customer's
Mm.
shoes, the customer's data, right? The customer's existing systems, right? The customer's workflows and processes, like the the existing for me and what we do at CyberContext, the existing regulatory environment that is ever changing, right? We're beginning to push into data privacy spaces, which are state regulated and just now going into effect. And there's dozens and dozens of them that have gone into effect and are coming into effect. I mean, the fact is that there's a lot there to, I use the phrase "get your hands dirty," and literally I just mean rolling around in the mud as far as like trying to find um like what is the most beneficial for them in this complex, regulated, highly documented, a lot of paper pushing, environment, and then how to bring in like automation and software based on Gen AI, natural language processing, and data understanding that's in our code. That's and that's what we do is we do the product, design partners, and iterate.
Yeah, I love your point there. It's like building on the first point you made, and I've done a lot of B2B SaaS and traditional industry, fintech, health tech, insurtech, right? And health tech is perpetual, or the healthcare industry is perpetually behind in technology, and we're on the bleeding edge of technology. So if we go to solve industry problems and we look at it the same way as the industry does, we wouldn't be able to create the outsized value with the modern philosophy, tool chains, approaches that we have. So I, a big part of the opportunity is just getting someone like yourself to roll around in the mud and iterate on a problem and do it from a modern perspective, and that's where that outsized value gets created. So I love your points there.
Thank you. Totally agree.
So something I know you have some thoughts about is as opposed to using off the shelf solutions for user interfaces for Gen AI and stuff like that, you've been exploring different libraries and frameworks for building out user interfaces. What are some highlights with your work there?
Oh wow. So like um anybody that looks at my profile will actually see a company name. And this is like my company when I was doing independent consulting kind of between startups and for some other smaller startups called Users First, right? So like one of my like deep identity passions, right, is around um, user interfaces and bringing software right to people because that's when it like really matters. And it's probably one of the hardest pieces, right? Um, that said, got a long history in like software architecture and like web development, and pushed some into mobile too. And more recently, I'm just fascinated by kind of where AI, machine learning, and kind of the landing on like Python in the programming environment for most people has kind of pushed into UI. And there's a famous guy. In the AI space, Karpathy. Andre Karpathy is probably the right pronunciation. Andre Karpathy, and he was early OpenAI. He was director of AI at Tesla. Right, he's Stanford guy, and he actually came up with these ideas around he calls software and software 2.0. And just in the past like few months, um, he was just kind of lamenting about why like he got an app put together in using Gen AI like in like a weekend, right? But then for a week after that, he had to deal with all of the authentication and making OAuth available so that people could log in and identify themselves, and the deployment issues and all of the packaging up, right, of software. Um, and when it comes to user interfaces, when it comes to the deployment, he was just lamenting all of why is this so painful. And I think that one of my passions is like how the first principles of like web development and UI development have like are pushing into those areas. So we're big fans of CyberContext. We've built our product on a software stack that is heavily open source in what we build, and we're big fans of this Python panel environment, which is a unique way to like really approach like web development too, which I'm kind of excited about, um, especially as it relates to like the first principles. And when I say that, I'm talking about things like custom elements and web standards. But I could like go on like in tons of rabbit holes and weeds related to user interfaces and development. I think the big takeaway for me is just kind of this merger of Python web applications, and with Python coming in to like the Gen AI, and that leads into natural language itself as an interface, right? And that is, I would say, the biggest opportunity. Now, when people talk about AI, are they talking about the mobile app that is, Grok, AI from XAI? Or are they talking about ChatGPT on the OpenAI interface and talking to it, which has an incredible voice interface too? Now, are they talking about Anthropic's Claude? Are they talking about Copilot from Microsoft? These all create like unique questions about like where is the interface going and how does it bring in integration into your environment versus like custom applications. And my background has mostly been traditionally in this area of like custom application development, building software products basically from the ground up. And
Oh,
now
all
we're
of
talking
us,
about
because we've
we're
been
bringing
doing
AI.
data for a long
That's right.
time. But as far as like this rendition of large language models, we're what 3 years in practically.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really, I mean, that's when the mindset really hit in. I think because of the ChatGPT release, I was working with OpenAI's GPT playground and APIs about a year before the ChatGPT release. We were attempting to do something in kind of I call it reverse IVR space to work on phone systems. But and then before that, like the word like word to vec and the kind of history of natural language processing, like it really kicked in like in kind of 2012, like 2013 timeframe with kind of um, word to vec and LSTM, which stands for long short term memory. This was kind of the hey, you know what? There's going to be something amazing here. But then obviously the transformer architecture and being able to train on, to your point, like so much data, right? And to make something that's kind of mind blowing in terms of natural language interface, especially when you combine search with it, right? And what I mean by that is, I I don't remember if I had told you this before, but I did a talk on this once. I like to call it Pinky the prompt engineer and Brain the embeddings. And what I'm referring to there is like the two foundational kind of pieces of what we're referring to as AI now. And that's prompt engineering in context, whether it be one or whether it be multiples, right? In terms of chain of thought reasoning or even iterative loop reasoning, right, on itself. Um, and then the second is in what is bringing the embeddings is really about how we inject search keyword capability. I know I don't know if you'll appreciate the regex kind of reference in that, but basically the idea of how do we pull together, particularly in the embedding space, the cosine similarity of what's the context that we're operating in from a natural language perspective, um, and then what can we do like automated, right? This is what people would call agentic now. right? What we can do as an agent. Um, yeah, which that brings to mind uh, the recent vulnerability I discovered, like the CVE about Microsoft Copilot just in the past 2 weeks was basically injected with a prompt injecting problem, and um, these are is a standard system issue if you're able to execute code on behalf in your system. But because it's wired up to an AI interface, right? Now it becomes basically a black box to people, such that it's doing something malicious or able to do something malicious and able to communicate back to an attacker. Um, when when that definitely was not intended at all.
Yeah, it's like
So
prompt injection. So in that context, that vulnerability, it's something we've always needed to do. We need to have input and output validation. Otherwise, we'll have security, data integrity issues. So in that case, well, we're letting GenAI do things, and then we're bypassing security practices that we normally have in place, right? If we're talking
yeah,
uh, typing into a web form, we'd have input validation unless we're making massive mistakes, right? So,
yeah. And
um,
you have to have input validation in kind of Gen AI systems too. I think the piece that's the most interesting for me is how people blur the distinctions that are required in AI. Like the distinctions between Microsoft Copilot and OpenAI ChatGPT and those interfaces, or Google Gemini or XAI's Grok. Like these interfaces are systems in themselves, right? That are built on top of the pinky and the brain that I just mentioned, right? Where they have built interfaces that potentially could have like a vulnerability like that example. And it's kind of just a misnomer to talk about AI generally, right? Without like being more grounded, right? In terms of what do I mean by that? Am I talking about somebody using ChatGPT on their phone, or am I talking about the specific OpenAI models that I'm calling the chat completion prompt API calls on, or the specific embedding models that I'm using, right? For search and semantic similarity. Like it's really, um, I mean, just like everything in tech, right? Becomes overblown as far as the terminology and hyped up. And then we lose kind of our grounding until we talk long enough to gain it back.
well, I do think uh, Gen AI, this application of technology, is a paradigm shift, right?
Me too.
Having been through paradigm shifts before, early days of the internet, I think we've had a lot of significant milestones in that time in technology, right? We have pocket computers with massive compute, our phones, right? And just proliferation of bandwidth has changed the way we can use compute. We're not
Yes.
constrained by the amount of compute we can fit in a physical space because we can transfer data around. So, our application of technology has evolved substantially in that time
Yep.
frame. But I really look at Gen AI as a paradigm shift, but in a lot of ways, we're still talking about the same old paradigms. I find that boring to some extent, but I acknowledge that we need to get through that period. It's like we're using programming is a human computer interface, and that's all
Mhm.
it is. Now we're using another human computer interface, Gen AI, on top of another human computer interface programming. So we're like creating unnecessary sophistication in our abstraction layers for humans to talk to technology. So super powerful, doing some really neat stuff. But
Yeah.
I don't think
Amazing.
we've even scratched the surface of what that changing paradigm is quite yet.
I mean, I think in my career, like with the internet, I feel like this is kind of my what I would call the fourth wave. like a paradigm shift, right? Um, I think that if I just quickly tell you where my head is, I feel like the internet itself kind of, and it was about every 8 years, it was kind of the internet itself. Then it was like, I don't know how to quickly define this, but it was the time periods like in the early 2000s. It was like Google search, and it was more like in mobile, like not mobile yet. It was like it was wireless actually. So it created laptops wireless, and Google search was kind of ubiquitous. And then there was mobile, and then now this. And this, I think, is best defined by this natural human interface, if you will. And maybe it's language, maybe voice, would be the best way to describe it. But I absolutely think that it's a huge wave and changes how we potentially, especially when with, and I can get some flack for this, but especially with the search and reasoning capabilities combined with that interface, because that's really what we're talking about, where it becomes um, even more informative, right? In working with an AI, if you will, chat completion prompting, embeddings, um, working with those becomes more informative than and quicker than what we were used to in like Google searches, even with all the ads now.
Certainly interesting times. I am familiar with the wave concepts. I intentionally avoid those contexts because I think it's easy to get into a typical narrative, right?
Mm,
And narrative, and it's back to those big tech changes we've had: pocket computers, proliferation of bandwidth.
mhm.
I do
Yeah,
know in some parts of computing, like telecommunications, there's been a lot of talk about edge computing, bringing compute
yep.
closer.
Closer
Uh,
to people. Yeah,
so there, in 5G,
users.
some of our wireless technologies are enabling that. But in some ways, I think some of those things just might go away altogether, and
Right.
we haven't figured it out yet.
It's super weird. Like it's almost like you can see it, like where it should go away, like immediately. But I mean, the fact that I speak over here and like my speak over here to my Google Home, right? And it behaves differently than when I pull up my phone and it's Google Gemini app, right? Is super weird, right? So like just the discongruity there between those two things, like interacting with Google Home, bringing up my Google Gemini app, right? And the fact that they're different, that's going to go away. But why is it not gone away yet? That's an interesting question, and if you ask me.
It's
But
probably more an organizational question in the way the
it
company is structured, right?
it totally is a big enterprise, bureaucratic environment, whatever it might be. Um, but it's like the, I don't know, kind of the already but not yet, right? Like it's so clear, like where it's going to go in some cases, but it's not. It creates this irritation points, I guess, along the lines.
I was recently talking with someone about model context protocol and talking about creating interfaces. And
Mhm.
I know you've been doing some work with MCP. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Model context protocol. I think um so I'm not let me preface it by saying while wanting to be aware of like where things are at and where things are going is really important to me, I am not one to jump into things like head first really quickly. So yeah, I'm aware of model context protocol. I've looked into the client server kind of architecture of creating it and kind of the discovery like protocols that are within it. I think it adds some interesting things on top of kind of what I like to call the API economy, which I've been expecting for at least the past 10 and 15 plus years. Um, if not more, probably 20. Like since we used to call it service-oriented architecture. Actually, if anybody can connect with
Before
that.
microservices took over.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Before microservices was a thing. Um, I I kind of expected and still do expect like this API economy to be more. But I remember even early days in my career, um, Ariba and Commerce One and the kind of business to business space of like APIs and what a challenge they had just from a business perspective, right? Like business changing who controls what in terms of information flow. Part of my early career, I worked for a company that was in the space called Fourth Channel, and we were acquired by a company called SPS Commerce that is in this kind of business to business web form EDI space. If any of the listeners out there can relate to EDI, electronic data interchange. Um, but you saw it there too, in terms of the leverage within APIs and like who controls it, which side really is setting the rules of the game, right? In terms of the system design. And I think that that is yet to even be discussed from an agent like MCP's perspective. So that said, that was all of my preference to say that while I'm completely aware of like the MCP and following it closely, I'm in and I'm excited about it too. I haven't delved deeply into it yet. And the reason I'm close is because more recently, the past 4 weeks, Google's agent to agent is supporting MCP in addition to OpenAI, and obviously Anthropic is the source of the MCP standard, which is an open standard on GitHub. Um, it seems like it's got a lot of momentum in the open community amongst the big players, and that's exciting. But it really is. I think it's really the discovery piece in it, and and the client server kind of layer of the protocol that allows for this like repeatability in it. But it totally reminds me of the same questions about the APIs and the API economies and when are they used, when are they needed. Um, I think there's so much interesting pieces now about our interfaces in Discord and Slack and Teams and FaceTime and iMessage, right? Like these interfaces and how do these potentially relate to like agent interactions, especially in group context? Like, I think, and that being built with model context protocol sounds great, but ultimately it's going to become a standard that the user doesn't care. They just they want the automation, they want the experience, they want it augmented with AI in their natural language environment.
Yeah, when it came up, when I was talking about it last, we were talking more about security. And I think coming back to your point with prompt injection, it's like these aren't new security paradigms. It's just thinking about the things we're doing and breaking it down, thinking about it contextually, and not just running into it blindly, assuming everything will work out. And tools like that, if we're exposing internal data sets to LLM interfaces effectively, we are potentially bypassing authentication, role-based access, uh, and mostly, I wouldn't want to worry too much about access with GenAI, right? I, I think of our application of it in the context of the user, right? So if it's internal, it's internal. If it's public, it's public. And I really wouldn't want to be exposing our confidential or more restricted data sets to that. And that's
Yeah.
part of the challenge is when we have these, I'll say, things that connect our old technology to our new technology and just trying to make it easy with both the paradigms. We kind of skip what we're doing in the first place. Skip some of the
That's
processes or thoughts or approaches we take if we were just doing one or the other.
that's a great point about the risk, right? Absolutely. That CVE that was recently released with Microsoft Copilot, as I understand it, was exactly that. It was because an email or a calendar invite through email, um, because it was able to be um, analyzed in a prompt against Microsoft's M365 Copilot, that it then created a vulnerability that the prompt could return back additional information in your systems in an automated way without any interaction by the end user to the sender of, right, the email, to the sender of the calendar invite. Um, and it was just simply that, like a like injection, where if you, and any software developer with any little bit of experience understands that if I do an evaluation like on code, right, and I'm using the evaluation on something that comes in, right, then without scrubbing it, it is got a vulnerability in it, whether it's SQL injection or whether it's code evaluation. It's like this is the story of cross-site scripting, right? Where people inject code into websites that can then run on your website. Um, this is like as old as the internet is itself. But now it reveals itself in these AI systems because, I think there's a thing on my LinkedIn about AI. I actually learned it from a coworker of mine some years ago, Slava. He referred to AI as automated inference. And the reason that just came to mind, and I love that kind of definition for what AI is, it comes from my statistical and software roots, um, more so than kind of the hype around AI. But what the reason that came to mind is because we're trusting these automated systems, right? And the trust of these automated systems have to be designed as we've programmed systems for forever, right?
I'd simplify it all to the point of we don't want our user land to be able to have elevated privileges. And it's kind of the difference between Unix and Windows paradigms. Just using a really old school example,
Yeah,
Windows had perpetual security issues for many years, and that's partly because those two contexts weren't delineated. And if we are creating user context on the internet with our newer technology, our GenAI interfaces, and it's able to take privileged action, we might as well assume it's going to be vulnerable. So I suggest we not even create that ability in the first place.
that's a really great point. In fact, like I have a discussion with um, MJ Lindemann, my mom, actually, about this quite a bit because she's really been studying like kind of the user interfaces to different AIs, like Claude, for example's interface versus others. And it really starts to push into the question of identity too. Like the Microsoft example is really clearly around your M365 identity, right? And its integration with Copilot and why it was happening that way. Um, it really like I'd be interested in your thoughts about like kind of identity on the internet too, like especially like the individual like organizational identity. If we talk about that first, I think it seems a little bit more simpler. Employer, right, organizations like Microsoft has the big enterprises almost locked up, it seems. Google has a lot of play and a lot of traction, especially in the small mid-sized space. It seems like there's kind of nobody else, but I don't know if you agree with that. What do you think?
If we're talking about like corporate tech, I'd say the paradigm you example is what I more commonly see. I
Yeah.
usually put it more in the context of modern companies versus entrenched.
Yeah.
Because small to medium doesn't really reflect the size of a tech company, right? When we say small to medium,
Sure.
depending on who you're talking to, it might be headcount or it might be revenue, and it's like we can have companies that have millions and millions of revenue with very low headcount, and we can have a multi-million dollar, a billion dollar company with only a few hundred headcount. That's the power of scale we get with our
Yeah.
technology businesses. So, the more traditional paradigms for breaking down businesses, I just don't even think of things that way. much to the chagrin of my marketing and sales colleagues. But
I bet. Yeah, yeah. I think my thing is I'm looking, and maybe you'll probably hate that I go there with this, but maybe like blockchain, maybe like private key. I don't know. Like we're on Zoom right now. I'm a Keybase fan, like too. I think I might have mentioned that to you before. And that team was acquired by Zoom. But the question about identity and and the internet is is a big one, and it fascinates me. But I
I
think
don't
that
even think of Google or 365 or Microsoft really as the big players in identity. Uh,
yeah,
in my world, I more commonly we'd use Google as a stopgap until a company scales past a certain headcount. Some of
okay,
them use Microsoft, but most tech companies I work with are not in the Microsoft ecosystem. If they have it, it's usually because they want some of the Office suite, and it's not
right,
as material in their overall tech strategy.
yeah,
Identity tends to be with more modern identity platforms, commonly Okta, Auth0,
Okta,
things like that.
Okta, and
So
Auth0,
when
which
we're trying to
Auth0
solve
they
the
bought.
identity problem, we're
Yeah,
not even looking at those tool chains necessarily. If it's a small business, we
yeah,
might be looking at Chump Cloud, but we're
yeah.
usually
Actually, I
not
know them too.
going to the old school tool chains for that. The reason why
That's
they
it.
made sense is because that was the incumbent technology and it was a directory by default, right? So that's the place where all the user data is stored. So why not
Mhm.
authenticate against it?
Yeah, yeah. No, those are definitely Okta on the enterprise side, and then going public, and then buying Auth0 is definitely a big play in
Oh,
the
yeah, in industry,
identity.
I mean, these companies, Microsoft and so on, have been around for a long time, right? So
Right.
we'll see a lot of the legacy paradigms remain for a long time. Well,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
It's
We
been
will.
such a great conversation with you today, Pete, and I want to thank you for being here. Do
My
you have any
pleasure.
closing thoughts, books, anything you'd like to share with our audience?
Um, I guess the books question. I'll leave you with like two of my favorites. One, both I call software related. But one definitely more than the other. I think from like traditional perspective. Um, Mythical Man-Month is probably one of my favorites. Like it is an excellent like narrative around system architecture, and I love the concept of conceptual integrity, particularly as it relates to data, and as we are doing more with kind of AI and AI systems. I think this concept of conceptual integrity is like super, super important. And Mythical Man-Month is my like recommendation on the software side. And then the other one is not traditionally a software kind of reference, but I love sharing it with people because it's really about kind of this question of quality and what is quality. And I know we talked a lot about like user interfaces um, and kind of like system design and where they can break down and such. But it's a novel, and it's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and it's probably my favorite of all time. I've read it multiple times, and it's really how to like I said that I earlier I said I'm kind of in the gray area, and I was kind of describing like two sides of like product and kind of having a product versus iterating with customers. And in Zen and Aramosa maintenance, they have the two sides of the metaphysics of quality, and one's the romantic view and one's the classic view. And the classic view is the engineering, kind of how the motorcycle runs, how it works, what it takes to tune it, the specifics of turning a wrench on a motorcycle. And the romantic view is the wind in your hair, the pavement beneath your feet, right? It's the mountains that you're driving through in Montana. And those are, I think, are really beautiful in terms of trying to find quality in it. In the midst of like system design. And Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, highly recommended.
You know, funny. Just in the past 2 weeks, that's the third time that book has come up, and
Let's
it
do it.
hadn't come up in years before that, and just in my life, right? And
We're gonna start a book club right
I
here, right now. We'll start a book club. So
Yeah, and I know that was a favorite of my friends in the past, and it never got to the top of my book stack. I think I'm gonna have to order it after we get off this. I'm gonna get around to reading it.
excellent.
Well, thank you all for listening to Project Gamma presented by GammaForce.io. If you've enjoyed this podcast, check us out on your favorite podcast platform to catch future episodes.